On today's Locked On Heat, we put our all NBA teams together and figure out if anybody on the Miami Heat will make the cut. It's going to be tough, but I think we might figure it out. We break it all down next.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to a Friday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. This is our last show of the week. It is our last show before basically the end of the regular season, right? We'll have a recap of whatever happened Sunday night against Orlando Magic, but we're pretty much done here, right? We're all looking ahead to the playoffs. But before we get to the postseason, end of season award ballots are due. And all NBA team selections will be due for voters. Now, David, you and I do not have a vote. We discussed who we would have on our Defensive Player of the Year ballot on yesterday's episode. Spoiler alert, it's Bam Adebayo. But we break down the whole case and why he should get it and why he might not get it. So check that out if you haven't already. But I thought this would be a really good time to kind of just go through and make our all-NBA team selections. And I think this is a good encapsulation of what has happened in this regular season that's about to wrap up. And we'll kind of answer the big question sort of hovering over the ballot for Heat fans is whether or not anybody on the Miami Heat is going to make it. Because like we discussed with Defensive Player of the Year, like has been discussed in MVP and all season long, it just doesn't feel like any one specific person, player, coach, anybody on the Heat is getting a ton of credit. And now there's even like a push to maybe kind of Tyler Herro maybe isn't the sixth man of the year. Maybe it's Kevin Love and all this stuff. So I don't know. I honestly don't know if anybody on the Heat will make the all NBA teams. It'll be a fun exercise to sort of go through it to figure out if somebody does have a chance. But let's start here. Who are the guys? If you were just sort of make a long list of guys, or when you did make your long list of guys you were considering for all NBA selections, which Heat players were on that list?
It was Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
I think that was the end-all, be-all. I gave some consideration to Tyler because the guard spot feels a lot more faulty. And I think for all the argument against him as the sixth man and for everybody who has a subscription to The Athletic, read a piece by John Hollinger where he actually says that Tyler might be the third best sixth man of the year candidate behind Kevin Love and Cameron Johnson of the Phoenix Suns. So that's an interesting.
I really like John Hollinger, and I'm okay with the Kevin Love. If you want to argue him for sixth man of the year, go for it. But Cam Johnson, come on. I mean, just from a minutes played standpoint, that's ridiculous. I don't buy that at all. But I get it. It's whatever.
So Bam
Lowry, I actually think that Lowry has a pretty solid case. I know he's missed a bunch of time for personal reasons and stuff, but I wouldn't really factor that. That doesn't matter as much to me in a COVID year, and I know he wasn't out for COVID, but it doesn't really like a bunch of players miss time for a lot of strange reasons. And so like all like just the time missed doesn't factor in for me as much. And then Bam Adebayo is to me also in consideration. He's going to end up playing 56 or 57 games by the end of the year. To me, that's enough in a year like this to warrant at least consideration. But let's just jump right in with our first team, David. And I think the biggest concern here is, or the biggest question is, what do you do with Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic? Do you put them in because they're both going to be eligible at forward and center? Do you put one of them at forward, the other one at center? There's a whole lot now about basically everybody with a ballot has to align to put Jokic at forward and Embiid at center or vice versa, or one of those guys could basically get screwed and end up on the third team or off the team altogether if they're not getting if their votes get split between the two different positions because you don't aggregate the two set of votes. And so what are you doing with that?
I'm keeping it as is and putting one player at the center position and the other player at a center position on the second team. I think that's because they play center. That's just the reality of it. Bam has barely played the four at this point of the season, and I don't think he gets any kind of consideration as a forward. I think he's a center.
He is eligible forward.
Sure, he's eligible.
Oh, for you, no consideration. I
Yeah.
see. Okay.
No, I mean, I don't see him as a center. I'm sorry, I don't see him as a four, and I don't think I see Jokic or Embiid as a four either. So
Well,
I
because I
think
don't
you
play
better
it.
just stick to
It's
that.
ridiculous.
Right. Right.
So I actually push back against the notion that, hey, like, he's not a forward, so he shouldn't be voted in as forward. I'm okay with it. This
It's about
isn't like
getting
a
the
real
five best
team that's going to
players.
play. Yeah, I just want the 5 best players. When you look back on the all NBA teams like 10 years from now, you're not going to be like, well, that was weird that Jokic was a first team forward and Embiid was a first team center. You just say like, oh no, these guys are all NBA first teamers. We never talk about what position they were voted in on. That said, I was gonna go the entire time being like, I don't care. This is stupid. I'm just voting my top 5 players. If the 5 best players in the league were centers one year, I would just vote 5 centers. I wouldn't have a problem with it. But I actually ended up where you're at only because I don't want one of them to get screwed, and I hate how the NBA is doing this and not combining the two sets of votes for forward and center. And I just think that it's kind of messed up, but ultimately ends up being the best way to get the best players in it. And and I know we'll talk about this here, but when you zoom out on all 3 teams and to get the best 15 players on,
Yeah.
I think it works best to kind of unlock another forward spot down the line by keeping Jokic and Embiid at center spots and not having them occupy one of those forward spots. So it kind of comes down to a question of, all right, do you prioritize getting the 5 best guys on first team
Right.
or the best 15 guys on all 3 teams? And ultimately, I went with the 15 best guys on all 3 teams because I do think that, and we'll get to this a little bit, but who I would have as third team center if I ended up having basically 4 centers on my all NBA teams by putting Jokic at a forward spot, I don't think that player is as deserving as the guy who I can shoehorn in there at the end on my on the third team at forward. So that's kind of where I ended up.
Who's your fourth
So
best center?
that was going to be Rudy Gobert. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's what I
I didn't think Rudy Gobert deserved. I think he's one of these guys who was just on the bubble
Top
there. But I would
top
rather have the
25-ish
forward I
guy.
was considering than
Right.
the center than Rudy Gobert, who I did give a lot of consideration to. But all right, so you've got Jokic as your first team center.
That's right. I do.
Okay.
Nikola Jokic is the first team all NBA center.
I've got Jokic right now at center, although I would be okay swapping that depending on what happens over the next couple days. It's that close to me between Jokic and Embiid for first team.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got one of them at my first team center and the other one at second team center. So for the purpose of this exercise, doesn't really matter who ends up at which spot, but those are the guys. Who the other? You've got Giannis, I think, is a lock, right? And that's really it as far as locks for me. So where did you end up with the other forward spot?
LeBron James on there.
You did put LeBron.
I did.
First team.
First team. I think like interwoven. And look, we had
Eliminated
this
from the playoffs, LeBron James.
Are we voting best team or best individual teammate and his individual performance? And I know that the two are tied together to some degree, but you look at the roster and you look maybe at the decision-making process and building that roster and the hand that LeBron may or may not have played in building that roster. And certainly he deserves some of the blame for that, but we're not looking at executive of the year. We're looking at all NBA player. And I think his individual performance, despite the team
LeBron does not win executive of the year. That's for sure.
No, he does not.
It's a good call.
Yeah, going out on a limb there. But I think his individual play has been fantastic, carrying that team, and even the fact that they're in or we're near play-in tournament possibility there, I think speaks to his overall individual greatness. He's been the only good thing happening on that team all year, and you could argue that I'm sure Lakers fans wouldn't care, but I think he's deserving.
You know what? A lot of people are going to push back against that. The Lakers suck. You can't put LeBron on there. All this stuff. I'm okay with him having. I had him on my first team for a really long time. I kind of update this stuff as the season goes on, just sort of that, so I can get kind of a measure for what's going on in the league, like different snapshots as it goes on. I have him on my second team at this point. I've got Kevin Durant on my first team.
Yeah, we flip-flopped there.
Games played is going to end up being even though KD missed so much time there. And he's just been awesome. And his team is better, and they're in the playoffs. And I actually think he's been better all season long than LeBron James has when he's been available. So, and has done a lot to carry a Brooklyn team that hasn't been very good, outside of him, with Kyrie being in and out and all that stuff. So I've got KD there. Although I'm a lot of people, again, are going to push back on your LeBron thing, and I'm okay. If you want to put him on first team, I'm still good with that. There are people considering him not even putting him on their third team, like on the All-NBA altogether.
Oh, I know.
I
That
find
he might miss it.
I find that way crazier than having him on your first team. Two
Well,
guard
wouldn't that be
spots.
the case? Wouldn't that be the case if you move Jokic down to a forward spot? Like that kind of pushes LeBron out of the conversation. I mean,
For
is he
first
still a
team.
top? Yeah. Well, maybe is he a top 5 forward in the league this
Oh,
year?
I
I
see what
mean,
you're
maybe
talking
some
about.
people would. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
if
that's a
if,
good
if
point.
Jokic takes one of the 6 forward spots, then LeBron might get screwed out of one of the other 5.
Yep.
But we'll see. So
Um,
at guard,
At guard, this was really hard, and I've been
Mm.
flipping around the entire time. Like, this could change every day. I ultimately went with Luka and Devin Booker here. With
Oh wow,
and Ja Morant was the guy who I bumped.
yep,
Um, so here's my Devin Booker versus Ja Morant argument. So Devin Booker, 31 points per game on 53.4% shooting in March. He has been killing it lately as he ramps up to the playoffs. Um, like Ja Morant's numbers are awesome, but they are not like way awesomer than Devin Booker. And I love the push that Devin Booker is making late in the season because I feel like sometimes that doesn't get talked about enough because people are sort of like settled in who they're going to vote for already. And also like Devin Booker and the Suns really needed him during that Chris Paul with that stretch where they didn't have Chris
yeah,
Paul, and he stepped up and it didn't look like I know everybody thinks that it's been easy, like a cakewalk for the Suns all year, but they didn't have Chris Paul for a really long
wow.
time.
They're just
And
really
it looked
good. Yes,
easy because of how good Devin Booker was. He matters so much to what Phoenix does. He makes it look easy. The Suns are a plus. They're outscoring teams by 6.7 points per 100 when Devin Booker's on the floor. The Grizzlies are outscoring opponents by 3.1 points per 100 possessions when John Morant is on the floor. That kind of goes with the narrative case about how the Grizzlies have still had success without John Morant, right?
right.
The Suns are 54-12 with Devin Booker in the lineup. They've been awesome. The Grizzlies have still managed to win a bunch of games without John Morant in the lineup. I don't think that it should be held against him in a really meaningful way, the fact
Right.
that his team has succeeded without him. But in the case of splitting hairs between Devin Booker and John Morant, it does matter to me a little bit that Devin Booker has carried the Suns. Not to say that John Morant hasn't, but those on-off splits and all that kind of stuff, that ultimately is what split those hairs to me in favor for Devin Booker.
It doesn't happen often, Wes, but you've convinced me. I've taken Moran out
Oh,
of my first team. I thought you made a good
I like it.
argument there. So
Wow.
I think Devin Booker,
It's April Fool's.
first team. No, a couple of days after it, actually. But
All
I
right,
think
let's
I
do.
think you earned it.
So then do you have Luca as your other guy?
I do, yes.
I think it's
that's
self.
pretty
The
clear.
guy's awesome. Yeah, I think we don't need to spend a lot of time there. All right, we'll move on to our second team next. But first, David, tell listeners about BetOnline.
Well, if you want to make a wager on who will make the All NBA team, then betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championships, all the odds, and all your favorite awards for the NBA and reviews for all the different leagues this season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Also, a shout out to our friends over at Locked On Dolphins, Locked On Marlins. Florida sports is having a moment right now.
Hey,
So check out those.
we're not overlooking Locked On Panthers on this show,
I don't know
buddy.
if we have a Locked On Panthers, do we?
We absolutely do.
Oh,
Armando
wow.
Velez, he does a fantastic job. Yes, and he shouts us out all the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Can't believe I overlooked
he's
that. Shout out Armando
yeah,
Velez. All right.
yeah.
Yeah, Locked On
Which is cool.
Panthers, number one seed Panthers.
All right.
Two number one seeds in Miami right now. So,
Go Cats.
well, Sunrise, but whatever. So, second team. Where do you want to start with this? You and I both agree that we'll have either one. Are you pretty settled on Jokic and Embiid, or are you willing to sort of flip flop based on what happens the next 2 or 3 days?
No, I'm not. I think Embiid's had the better team behind him, and while he's had more success, and I know there's the difficulties of the Ben Simmons saga, incorporating James Harden, et cetera, I just look at what Jokic has been able to do, and personal feelings about the Markieff Morris notwithstanding or anything like that. Like he's just a really damn good player and is supremely impactful. I think a lot of Heat fans just don't watch a lot of Nuggets games because of the time difference and everything else like that. But if you watch what Jokic does, he's such a phenomenal player. He does it with his score. He does it with his passing. He is Bam Adebayo on steroids when it comes to his scoring and production. So I think that's something to consider.
And you had KD on your second team and LeBron on your first team. You and I basically just flip-flopped those, so we're in alignment here. But we have a forward spot and 2 guard spots available. Well, you said you have Ja Morant on your second team, so we have 1 guard spot, 1 forward spot available. Where do you want to start with this?
Well, let's start with a guard spot then, because I think this is a name that is certainly deserving and was likely to be a first teamer for most of the season, but then went through a little bit of a slump there, had some injury issues, and then the team fell off a cliff for most of the last couple of months. And I think that's Steph Curry. Like, to me, when he's on his peak, he's been phenomenal this year. It's been, maybe not the kind of season that he expected to have or that he looked like he was going to have early on, and yet I still have him as my second team guard alongside now Ja Morant.
So I've got Ja Morant as my second team guard, and I've got Chris Paul as my other second team guard.
All right.
I had Steph for a really long time, but on my first team and then on my second team. But I just look, Chris Paul, Steph Curry, they've both missed a bunch of time. They're going to end up with roughly the same amount of games played by the end of the season. I know that Steph's numbers are really good. Chris Paul is so important to that team. And it's sort of like the anti-Devin Booker argument and the same sort of argument I made with Ja Morant earlier. But I think the team like the Phoenix Suns, and I usually don't go this way. I don't really say like this team needs this many guys on this for this ballot or whatever. But the Suns are so historically good. Their net rating they've dominated from start to finish all season long. They're going to be in company of teams as far as win percentage goes, like some of those 90s Bulls teams, that 2012 Heat team, the 17 Warriors team. I mean, when you're talking about 66-ish wins or whatever they're going to end up, that deserves to me 2 dudes on like your first and second team probably. And so I'm going with Chris Paul. I was splitting hairs between him and Steph for second team, and I ultimately just went with the guy on the better team, on the team that he sets the tone for, and a team that's just been dominant all season.
I had a hard time making a case for Paul, and I actually wound up leaving
not there
him off
statistically.
Oh, yeah, wow. I wound up leaving altogether. Giving the nod to Booker, I thought was kind of giving that team the due that they deserve, and yet now I feel like I've left them a little short there. But I just think with the time missed and everything else, like the fact that this team could continue to carry forward as well and as dominantly in his absence, I don't know. It's kind of it's a tough case to make for him, which is interesting considering who I have at the other forward spot.
Well, who do you have at the other forward spot?
Jimmy Butler.
You have him on your second team.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this. So who were the guys that you were considering for this spot?
I considered Jason Tatum.
Mm-hmm.
I considered DeMar DeRozan.
Mm-hmm.
I considered Pascal Siakam.
Mm-hmm.
They're all up there, but I ultimately went with Jimmy Butler. I think his defensive impact is greater than almost all of those players by far. I think what he does as far as being an underrated playmaker is overlooked. The fact that his scoring has been somewhat problematic, and yet he's still one of the top scorer on this team. Well, maybe second out to Tyler, but either way, like he's the best player on this team. He carries his team. He to use your phrase regarding Chris Paul, he sets the tone. Like you go as far with this team as Jimmy Butler will take you. And despite the blow up, despite the potential issues that might be behind the scenes and everything else, I still think that Jimmy Butler is a fantastic player, and I think he is deserving of being considered one of the best players in the NBA.
So I had Tatum here, and it's a really tough statistical case to make in favor of Jimmy Butler because Tatum's going to play almost 20 more games. He's averaging 5 or 6 more points per game. He's shooting more efficiently. He is really good defensively for the best defensive team in the league. I think most people are considering
all NBA with their 5 defensive player of the year candidates. I mean, it's kind of hard to separate there.
But right. Not to take anything away from Marcus Smart, but I, I went with Tatum here. I think the statistical
That's
case
fine.
for him is overwhelming. I actually almost considered putting Tatum on my first team over Kevin Durant because of the availability concern. Just
Mm,
given how many more games he's going to play than Kevin Durant and LeBron James, I think
yeah,
Tatum has more of a first team argument than a third team argument. And I have like Jimmy Butler to me is like, does he make the third team? Is sort of more of where Jimmy Butler sort of occupies. But hey, I mean, you're kind of also using the Chris Paul argument to put Jimmy Butler on your second team, right?
I
Best
know. I
team in
said
their
that.
conference. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So it's like I I can't argue with your case because I just made the same case for Chris
for
Paul.
Chris Paul,
But
right?
I just couldn't find an overwhelming statistical case for Steph or any of the other guards over Chris Paul, where I feel like the statistical case for Tatum is pretty overwhelming. That
Yeah.
said, this is a good enough time to move on to our third team. We're going to do that. But first, tell the listeners about Built Bar.
Well, I mean, Built Bar. What can I say that I haven't said already? It's such a fantastic product, and I know for so many people, it's hard to keep to a diet or to just try to eat healthier, and it's a challenge, no doubt about it. But the best thing about Built Bar is that you're not sacrificing any of the taste that you would want in a candy bar or any kind of indulgent treat, and yet you're getting all the protein, all the nutrients that you might be looking for in a protein bar. So many delicious flavors to choose from. You can try them all. You can get a mixed box with all of your favorites. You can just buy an individual box if you find the one that you like. If it's chocolate mint or anything else like that, I'm sure that you'll find something that satisfies you. In a Built Bar, that's just the best thing about it is that it's just a great go-to snack in between meals. If you want to fuel a workout, get you through a long meeting at work, or if you're stuck in traffic and you don't have anything else to eat, you can't really pull off if you're on the highway to get some fast food or any of that junk. You don't want that. Get a protein bar, something healthy, something good for you, and something that tastes great above all else. And best of all, if you go to built.com and use the promo code LOCK15, you get 15% off your next order. So use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off, but only if you go to built.com.
Back here with Locked On Heat, doing our all NBA teams. Just a quick recap. My first team: Luka Doncic, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Giannis, Jokic. What was your first team?
Jokic, also Booker and Luka, and LeBron and Giannis.
So the same, but swapping KD with LeBron. My second team was John Morant, Chris Paul, Jason Tatum, LeBron James, Joel Embiid. You had John Morant, Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Kevin Durant, Joel Embiid.
Correct.
Okay. So now we're on our third team. So I got Steph on my third team. He didn't make the second team. I've got him on my third team.
Yep.
Who are your third team guards? Because you said you
Oh
left Chris
boy.
Paul off your ballot.
Yeah, I did. This is going to draw some enmity here. Trey Young gets the vote from me.
I had him
I
too.
have,
He's my other guard.
but I also completely blew up any argument that I've made before and went with Jason Tatum at guard.
That's right. He's eligible. Okay. All right. So who are your forwards? I guess is the next logical question.
I mean, I don't know if logic plays into it, but I went with DeMar DeRozan,
Uh-huh.
and I went with Pascal Siakam.
Okay, so you ended up getting Siakam in there. All right. So I went Steph Curry, Trey Young. Again, just the stats are overwhelming. I was between Trey Young and Donovan Mitchell again, but
Yep.
the Hawks are going to end up making the playoffs, so they don't suck completely, and well, they'll make the play-in tournament, I should say. And
Right. No
like I
guarantees
mean, the
there.
guy's averaging like 28 and 10. You know, it's crazy what Trey Young is
Hard to
doing, and
overlook. Yeah.
he's not the reason why the Hawks have sort of faltered this year, right? If anything, you can almost frame it to where he's carried them into the play-in tournament despite everything that's gone wrong with
No
that
doubt.
roster. So
No doubt.
I got no problem with that. So our guards are settled. Interesting that you ended up trying to shoehorn Jason Tatum in there. And in order to what was the logic? Because you wanted to put Pascal Siakam in over somebody like Donovan Mitchell or Chris Paul or Zach LaVine or somebody like that?
Yeah, I don't like. I mean, if DeMar gets the vote, I don't think Levine is deserving. Again, I had a hard time envisioning Chris Paul as an All NBA player this year. Not that I mean, again, hard to make a case against him, but also
Right.
hard to make a case for him. And I just thought Tatum, using the same kind of statistical evidence that we talked about as his selection as a forward, I just tried to figure out a good way of getting him in there. And I think Siakam has been the steady, consistently good player. Like they've got a great rookie, but Anunoby's been in and out of the lineup due to injury. They don't really have a center to speak of. I mean, it's been a tough
Yeah.
season for them. And Fred VanVleet gets some consideration, but
Yep.
not as a guard. I think the guard field is a little too heavy, and so I like what they've done. And so, given that, I thought Siakam was deserving, and I think he's coming off of this strange season last year where he was totally overlooked. He had problems with Nick Nurse. It just didn't seem to go well for him, and he's tried to rebuild it. And I think his season statistically has been so damn good, and that team has been pretty good. I thought he was deserving of a spot.
So I was kind of building up this whole podcast to kind of pin Jimmy Butler versus Pascal Siakam against each other for the final forward spot. But you blew it up by putting Jimmy Butler on your second team and putting Siakam on your third team. But I ended up with Steph, Trey, DeMar DeRozan, and Karl Anthony Towns. And I was really comfortable with where I ended up on my third team.
Yeah,
and then there was that
too.
final forward spot. Yeah, I think Cat, that one's easy. And then I ended up being between Jimmy Butler and Pascal Siakam for all the reasons you said. I was considering Siakam, and the statistical case for Siakam is better than Jimmy Butler's. You really can't argue with it. Siakam, 22.4 points per game on 49% shooting, 36% from three, 8.5 rebounds, 5 assists, a plus 3.8 when he's on the floor in those 38 minutes that he plays per game. Jimmy Butler, 21 points a game, 48% shooting, 23% from three-point range, basically 6 rebounds, 5.5 assists, marginally better when they're on the court, plus 4.2 in his 34 minutes. But Siakam plays more. He plays more minutes. His 2-point field goal percentage is better, not just the 3-point field goal percentage. And he's going to end up playing 10 more games than Jimmy Butler. So you really can't make the statistical case that Jimmy Butler deserves a spot on the All-NBA team over Pascal Siakam. Except for this, David. Jimmy Butler just means more to the Heat. And the stats are close enough where when you just watch the games and you're like, who means more to their team? I think it's pretty clearly Jimmy Butler, because I'm not even sure if Pascal Siakam means more to Toronto than Fred VanVleet does.
He does not.
Right? And so you just watch these games and you're like, you know what? This guy is getting the hardest defensive assignments every single night. He's being guarded by the best defender every single night. Where in Toronto, that fluctuates depending on the matchup. Is the better defender on VanVleet? Is he on Siakam? Do you have to move that player onto Scotty Barnes when he's feeling it? Whatever it might be. You just watch the games and it's just, you can't argue who matters more to the better team. And that's Jimmy Butler. And I love the dunks and threes EPM thing, because I think it's a really good it's sort of like Real Plus Minus and Raptor from 538. And by the way, all that stuff, Jimmy Butler blows Pascal Siakam out of the water on all those advanced metrics. Raptor, Real PER, all that, Real Plus Minus, all that stuff. The EPM on dunks and threes, estimated plus minus, Jimmy Butler is 11th in the NBA, so a top 11 player according to this metric. Pascal Siakam is 65th. So I just think that, when you really get down to it, who matters more? Who's the better player? Who is carrying more of a load? Who has more responsibility to set the table for their team, to carry their culture torch for their team, to do all those things? It's Jimmy Butler. And that, where the statistical case is marginally close, that thing, the who matters more to their team, is not even close at all to me. And so ultimately, I went Jimmy Butler, my final forward on my All-NBA third team, and the only Miami Heat member on my All-NBA team. That was the same for you.
Yeah, he made the second team for me. But did you have any other Heat player that was in consideration? Like, who would have been the other player to get that? Lowry?
I almost went Bam. I considered briefly Bam over Cat, but Cat has just had an overwhelmingly good season. He's been much better defensively. The Timberwolves are a nice story. I like the idea of having a Timberwolf on this roster. And offensively, he's just amazing. Like, you just can't argue with him. And ultimately, that's what matters in this league. It's points, putting points on the board. So, and then Kyle Lowry, I thought about it. I just think that the guard spot is so overwhelming. Like, I don't know where, at what point when you go down the list, where does Kyle Lowry go? Like, even if it wasn't these 6 that I had, you could make an argument for Donovan Mitchell, Zach LaVine, Fred VanVleet, Jaylen Brown, Darius Garland, DeJounte Murray, like all these other guys too. And in addition to Kyle Lowry, like, there's just a lot of guys in this mix. And if I was going to get another guard on this, it would be Donovan Mitchell first and foremost. And I just didn't have enough room. So those were really it. Really, it's Jimmy Butler. And by the way, I do think Jimmy Butler ends up making All-NBA this year. I think he will.
I think so too. That's fine. And he gets the recognition that he deserves. But I will say this as we wrap up today's episode. One, It's impossible to put these lists together. There's always going to be an element of subjectivity. There's always going to be a limited amount of information that you can use. You can't possibly process every game, as I've said before, and it becomes increasingly harder and harder to make these kinds of decisions. So, as fans, don't beat yourselves up if Jimmy doesn't make it. Don't beat anybody up for not having Jimmy on their list, etc. I think it's just ridiculous. And I was going to make a second point, but I completely forgot what it was.
Save it for next week. That'll do it for us today. Remember to like and subscribe to Locked On Heat on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Comment and leave a 5-star rating and reach us on Twitter at Locked On Heat. Seriously, leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. We haven't gotten one in a little while, and leave a review. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and it's available on all platforms. David, have a great weekend, man.
Yeah, you too, Wes.